Hey folks, what's up? Today on this episode of the Product Bowl podcast, get ready for a discussion on practical applied generative AI. I'm thrilled to welcome Apurva Misra, a highly skilled AI engineer who is on the front lines of applying cutting edge AI to real world product challenges. Apurva is a machine learning engineer, consultant, writer, entrepreneur, you name it, she has done it with a proven track record in MLOps, chatbots, and using large language models to solve real-world problems. She's an alumni of University of Waterloo. Her passion lies in working with interesting people and using data and technology to answer hard questions. Our episode title is Production Gen AI, Practical Use Cases and Challenges, which perfectly reflects Apurva's expertise. We'll be grilling her on the exciting potential of generative AI for product development, specifically drilling down on RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation. We'll delve into practical use cases like her work on allergen detection and customer support systems, and get her insights on the challenges of bringing RAG pipelines into production. This conversation is packed with actionable insights, so let's get started. Apurva Misra, thank you for coming on to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Harini.
I'm following you on LinkedIn, and I saw a couple of talks that you have given recently. One in DevFest 2024 by Google Developer Groups, and another one from AI Camp Vancouver, both on improving RAG systems. So really excited to have this conversation with you about all things about RAG. So before jumping in, if you can give a quick intro, about what you do and what you like to our audience. Yeah.
So I am an AI consultant. I don't really like advise. I actually build solutions for companies. Before that, I was working full time as a machine learning engineer, and I'm a graduate from University of Waterloo. And my research thesis for my master's was on cognitive driver distraction, where I was introduced to machine learning. So like how we can transfer control to a driver when he or she is driving an autonomous vehicle. Yeah.
It's awesome. And how was DevFest 2024? What's the audience like? How was your talk?
It was amazing, actually. I got to speak with like the other speakers, really talented people, got to learn so much. And it was a mix of like technical and non-technical talks. And it was it was divided into two halves. One happened in SFU and the other one happened in Northeastern University. So there was a mix of like professionals as well as students. So it was good to like learn from both ends.
No, that's awesome. If you have the links to any of the docs, we will definitely put it out in the show notes. But great, yeah. So let's get started. So in your website, you see a couple of very interesting projects. One is customer Q&A system using LLMs, and another one is allergen detection system. So in your experience, what are some of the most impactful generative AI use cases you've seen, across your the industries, across your experience, and how are these solutions driving measurable outcomes, like tangible outcomes for the users?
So the customer Q&A system that you're referring to, that was really useful. It reduced the number of questions going to humans by like 21%. So the problem that that company had was it's a growing startup, and they don't have enough people in their team to support the customers. They're growing, they're
Right.
gaining customers, but the hiring is slow, and they're not able to get enough like humans in there to like support the customers. So what we built was they wanted a chat bot, but I wanted to avoid chatbots because chatbot is not always a good solution. No one wants to go and I don't want to do that, even though like I'm the one who built it. So
Right.
I what I built for them is a Q&A system. So a person goes and asks a question and it gives an answer with like citation. So it could like pull it from a YouTube video from the transcript there, or it could pull it from the conference documentation. So the answer just shows up and the person can give a thumbs up, thumbs down, did it answer? And then if it didn't answer, they can connect to a human being. So there's an
Right.
option for that after that. So what I noticed was the number of questions which are going to humans reduced, and I could analyze the questions, the kind of questions that are getting asked, and like sometimes even the person asks the question, and I think like the bot cannot answer it, we directly like push it to a human being. So we like
Right,
build like a
right,
classifier in the front for that.
right,
So I think that was a very useful implementation for them.
right,
They didn't have to grow their team as much. They have kept the team consistent, and they could like grow as a company and
right.
get more customers in.
That is awesome, and I think there are 2 points that you mentioned that are really interesting. One, everyone is asking for a chatbot. Every because when ChatGPT got introduced and everything, the most popular interface that everyone thinks the Gen AI use case would be a chatbot, but actually it's not the case. With something like what you said, like Q&A system, you have much better control over what you're delivering to your user, right? Like instead of a chatbot, it could be much more open-ended. You have, your guardrails are going to be much more complex to implement, I think. Um, the other one that you mentioned is, your client not having, enough amount of like people to do it, and then you have this build the system. And it's interesting because I've heard in multiple conversations. Now I've heard in like I've read in blog posts like in future, um, the stable amount of the team members is going to be very stable and constant, and the number of agents is going to grow. Like I think that's going to be a common thing that we're going to see now. Like, do you think that was one point that came out? Like, it's going to be a constant team. 2 engineers, I have 100 agents. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing as well. All those like popular tweets. You would
Right.
have like a $1 billion company with like one person just like working on it. Um,
Right.
but I think you still need humans in there because
Right.
we are trying to figure out which questions cannot be answered, and we need a human like
Right.
looking at the whole context, looking at the screenshot and stuff, and like
Right.
answering. Um, but yes, this technology has made people more productive.
Right.
So a company can grow with less number
Right.
of people, for sure. I
Right.
agree with
Right.
that point. Um,
Right.
but I don't think it's yet there to like replace them
We're not
completely.
going to be replaced. Okay.
Yeah, you would need the humans still in there, at
Yeah.
least for now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely agreed. Completely agreed. I do think it's going to be the parts that are going to be, I guess, not replaced, but augmented using these Gen AI applications is going to be the stuff that can be automated and stuff, I guess. So yeah, we'll delve into this later, I guess. Going to the next question, what are the common pain points do your clients encounter when adopting the Gen AI solution? Um, Especially if you have example, especially in sectors that are new to this technology, and how do you like convince them or address this challenge?
So what I have, this technology is very new um, for everyone. So like I was working in this field for a few years now, but I think everyone got aware of this technology after ChatGPT came out, right?
Right.
Like normal people got aware of it. Like I like people in the gym would also know, like people who are not working in the technical side, they would also know what ChatGPT is. If I say I'm an AI engineer or machine learning engineer, they understand it now. I used to say I'm a software engineer before because it's so
Right.
hard to explain what machine learning is. They thought I'm a mechanic or something. So
Right. Right.
uh, so this is very new for them. And like when you're working in companies where people are not sure how AI really works, even though they still know what ChatGPT is, they really don't know like how it works. It's very important to explain this to them. And I have faced this as a challenge in companies. For example, I'm working with a company right now, and I have to work with the domain experts, and
Mhm.
they understand that you put a prompt in and you get a response, but because if they have like seen software before, they expect a consistent response. So they would
Right.
ask me to like run like a bunch of questions through it, and then I do it like the next week, and the answers vary, and they don't understand
Right.
why the answers vary, and I have to
Right.
explain to them how it's probabilistic, like it would
Right.
vary, and that is the
Right.
expectation, even though, like
Right.
we said, we try to control it from our end. The
Right.
other thing that they don't understand is the effect of the prompt, how much it could affect the output. Even if you like change like a spelling, or it may fix a spelling mistake, it would change the answers drastically. Because if you had a spelling mistake in there, maybe the model
Right.
thinks, oh, you want the answer to be casual, that's your attitude, and that's what it'll like try to answer as.
Right.
Once you fix the spelling mistake, it becomes more professional. So like anything, even a little bit of change in the prompt can like change the
Right.
output completely and drastically. And
Right.
everyone wants it to be consistent. And
Right.
that's it's very hard to like get that across to them. So
Right.
and that is exactly why I like started like into like public speaking. Like
Right.
after like ChatGPT came out, like everyone like freaked out, they're gonna lose their
Uh,
jobs, and how does this black box even work? So I thought it was really, really, really important for everyone to understand how, at least the basics, how the AI works, and it's all
right.
dependent on the data out there. Because I think in the future we are going to have AI everywhere in every device
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
So it's important for you to understand how it works
Right.
a little bit at least.
No, absolutely, and I think you're bang on the point. The way AI products are built, the result is going to be stochastic, and it's not going to be like in the way traditional software engineering products are built. So with all the new like function calling and structured outputs and everything from OpenAI and all that, do you think it has been better to like control the outputs, or do you think we um, still have way to go?
Uh, Not really, So
Yeah.
what these large language models have introduced is amazing natural language understanding and generation. So
Right.
it's like a layer
Right.
which can
Right.
which can understand what a human being is saying and can
Right.
summarize and give you
Right.
a natural language response. Before, like LLMs, we were using BERT and we were using like, statistics and
Right.
stuff to like understand natural language. Doing name entity recognition. So I was working in NLP before like LLMs came out.
Right.
But
Right.
what I'm getting at is like it's like a layer for like understanding natural language and generating natural language. Even
Right.
though behind the scenes we can like have like JSON structured output and we can do
Right.
function
Right.
calling properly, you would
Right.
get some sort of like response from all of that function calling, which you would again use this layer to like summarize and give it to the human being, right? So
Right.
like
Right.
this input and output that is happening, and there's a user at
Right.
one end.
Right.
That's where like these domain experts get confused a bit, because I would go
Right.
to them and be like, for these bunch of questions, do these answers look all right? And they would be like,
Right.
oh, the bot seems very careful, we should do something with the prompt. And then if the bot is
Okay.
not, like, you do something with the prompt and the bot is not careful, then so like you have to be very, and you need to be very careful about like versioning your prompts, because
Right.
like when
Right.
the change happens, they would be like, okay, this is like worse, maybe we should go back. So it's so important, like prompt is really important, and you should be versioning it, and
Right.
you
Right.
have to be working with the domain experts, and you need to align with them
Mhm.
as closely as possible.
Right.
And for that, it's important for you to explain what the
Right.
what the pros and cons of this technology are.
Right. Worsening the prompts. I totally I want to thumbs up on that. And people who are listening to it, please do it. Yes. Otherwise, it'll be all over the place by the time we end up, finishing building the product. Awesome. No, there are so many practical tidbits. Thank you for that. If you can share some examples of adapting Gen AI solutions to meet specific customer needs, particularly when a client's requirements differ from typical applications. If you have any,
Uh,
um,
Specific to Gen AI needs, is it?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, for example, the allergen case that you referred to earlier that I
right,
worked on. So
right,
the issue that they were having, so the company is about like detecting allergens in
right,
items in the restaurant. So if
right.
someone goes to the application and tries to find gluten-free,
Mm-hmm.
nut-free,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know, ramen. So they would
Right,
they we have to be very careful. We'll have to like show up all the ramen places which contain like gluten-free,
right,
nut-free ramen, and we try to
right,
figure that out. Either the restaurant marks it, And
Right.
when they don't mark it, we try to figure it out using the ingredients that were mentioned in the menu. Um,
Right.
they obviously do not mention everything.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to go back to the restaurant, get more details. But there's like OCR. You're trying to like look at the menu pictures and trying to
Correct.
like get the ingredients out. But
Right.
in this use case, there are a lot of edge cases. There's this
Right.
like graph where there's like this tail,
Right.
and because there's so many food items out there,
Right.
and they could have a variety of ingredients. So
Right.
in this, we used LLMs. So we were working on this for a while, and when like LLMs came out, we used it for like synthetic data generation to
Ah,
to to build when we were like building a classifier to try to figure out,
right.
and
Right.
we use it for like to get like more examples in the tail end, more
Right. Right.
examples there.
Right. Right.
So I think this was like different from the usual use cases you
Right.
find using LLMs. Yeah.
Right. No, this is awesome. I think this is a very interesting use case. I have one very similar to this, actually. When you mentioned synthetic data generation, I was recently working on a project for identifying address entities from like blocks of like unstructured addresses and everything. And I didn't have a very good like golden data set to evaluate the model, like whatever I've built. And I tried using, packages like Python packages like Faker and everything to build
Mhm.
augmented address data sets, but none of them were like as good as the real addresses that I had. And the real addresses are very small amount of addresses, so I didn't have any evaluation system. And I used GPT 3.5, and it was amazing. It gave me, created, I don't know, a number of addresses, how many ever I wanted, and we're very close to the real data set I have. So I think case in point, synthetic data generation actually, I think it's
Yeah.
a very good use case of generative AI, I think. Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that example. The next question is regarding privacy and security. If you have seen any instances, how do you approach privacy, security, ethical considerations with like customers with their data? Yeah, especially if in fields where data sensitivity is high or in general. Yeah.
So we are very careful about the PII, personally identifiable information. So what we try to do is we try to use like a lot of guardrails. So you have LLMs at one end, and then you have like the user and the application, like a lot of function calls and stuff happening. So,
Right.
but whatever goes inside the LLM needs to go through a PII filter before it goes in. So PII could be the name of the person, the phone number,
Right.
the email address.
Right.
And you could go as simple as use like regular expressions to remove that, but it
Right.
doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Because they could be like the formatting could change quite a
Yeah.
lot. And that is where you would want to use neural network to figure out, you would do like, you would try to figure out whether this is a phone number based on the context or this is an email address based on the context. And you would filter it out. So what we have used is something called a PII reversible dictionary. So basically, it would replace the phone number with the word phone number or email address with the word
Ah,
email address, and that is
right.
what would go into the model. And the
Right.
model would like summarize, and the summary would be like, oh, it's so for this email address, we found the account, blah blah, and it would it would have the email address word there, and then we
Right.
would use the PII dictionary to like replace it with the actual email address, and then it would go back to the user. So the user would
Right.
never realize that we did this replacement before it went into the LLM and
Correct.
after it
Correct.
came out of the LLM. But we took care of the fact that the PII is not going into the LLM.
Right.
Because in most of my use cases, we are using APIs, and we want to make
Right.
sure that PII doesn't go into the.
Right, right. Do you by any chance like have a name? I remember seeing a company itself like built on this particular use case where it basically on real time given your data and in real time like just in streaming ways it removes the PIIs and then replaces it with like address or like user or something like that. I forget the
Uh,
name of the company, but
There are a lot of solutions for that, honestly. There's like
Okay.
AWS Comprehend. You can use
Right,
that
right,
too. It's
right,
like an API call and it would give you
right. Okay,
all the places where there is a PII. The other
right.
thing, going back to your question, the other thing which is important is using guardrails. So you don't want to talk about your competitors. You don't want to
Right,
like give out toxic language. So basically, you
right,
need to have like a bunch of filters before anything goes into that LLM, and a bunch of
right,
filters before anything shows up to the user after the LLM. You know.
right. Okay,
So I
perfect.
think that's very important. And I like going back to your point, there are a lot of solutions. You have
Okay,
to figure out like how expensive you can go,
yeah,
what latency you're okay with. Um,
right,
and again, based on your use case, like what kind of
right,
information you need to filter out.
right. Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. That's awesome. Again, LLM guardrails. There are tons of startups now. It's an interesting space. Great. So now let's move on to some, technical Gen AI based questions. Could you walk us through your process for selecting the right model architecture? What algorithm when developing the Gen AI solutions now? Is there like a specific preference towards, say, open source llama models versus, yeah.
It mostly depends on the company as well as
Mhm.
the use case. So the answer is
Okay.
it depends. But
Okay.
for example, like, looking at like vector databases, most of the companies I work with, they're already using Postgres. So instead of like going and like setting up a new database for them, just like add the PG vector extension and you have a vector database ready.
Right,
Like
right. Yeah.
make it as simple as possible for them as well.
Right.
The other thing is about like going back to models. It depends on the use case. For example, for a rack system, there are two
Mhm.
models that you use. One would
Okay.
be the embedding model. The other
Right.
one would be the generative model. Then yeah, you have the re-ranking model. There could be a lot of things you could be doing, but like mainly you would have
Okay.
the generation model and you have the embedding model.
Hmm.
But for example, in your use case, if a user says, I want to cancel my subscription immediately,
Hmm.
and the user says, I want to sign up for the subscription immediately.
Hmm.
For an embedding model, these could be like really close to each other. But in your
Okay.
use case, maybe these are like extremely different sentiments, and you want them to be far apart. So
Right.
you
Right.
might wanna fine tune an embedding model for your use case. But then going back, like if you go to Hugging Face, there's a ranking of embedding models. I would
Right.
suggest try them out for your use case. See if the
Okay.
embeddings are lining up to what you uh, expect them to. And
Okay.
then you can decide which one to go for. Don't really go for the top rank. Maybe it will work for your use case. And then even if it doesn't work, like start building a solution, and then you can like collect data to fine tune. Or
Okay.
you can use generate synthetic data to fine tune. But that would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this is for the embedding model. So for the generation model, is it the same thing or?
For the generation model, people focus too much on the generation model, honestly. I would say
Okay.
like the retrieval pipeline is more important and the embedding
Okay.
model is more important.
Okay.
The generation part is mostly like, if you think about it, it's just like summarizing what you have gathered. But again,
Right.
like in there are a lot of like moving pieces, like what API
Right.
calls you're doing, where you're collecting the data from. There would be the tool calling part. Is that model
Right.
doing tool calling properly? Um,
Okay.
so obviously you can do fine tuning there too.
Right.
But I would suggest like build a simple solution. Like I would
Okay.
build it and then figure out if fine tuning is necessary. Like it's
Right.
important, like you build it and then you make it work and then
Right.
you try to make it fast and then you try
Right.
to make it cheap. But like
Right.
important is like building it because it's important to like give it out to the users.
Right.
And start collecting data because it's an iterative process, honestly. Like you need to keep
Right.
working on it.
Right. It's a very good advice. Build it first and then build it fast and then make it cost effective. Excellent. Okay. The next question is about the scalability challenges. What are some of the main challenges with scaling Gen AI solutions? Say you're building it for a small set of customers or a segment, and then you go for a larger data set. Like, how do you ensure efficiency, performance, everything at scale, or how do you generally go about it? Yeah.
So for the scaling part, you the thing is you have to figure out, for example, a rack system. A rack system is mostly like modular. You have like the retrieval pipeline, you have the ingestion pipeline, then you have the generation piece.
Right.
So you have to figure out like which is slow. You you need to like try to make them faster. Then the other thing is like which piece do you want to make it scalable? For example, depending on the vector DB you have chosen, your ingestion might be slow,
Okay.
or your retrieval might be fast. Like it could be anything. So like
Right.
you have to figure out what pieces would make your system faster and scalable.
Right.
And this would start from the beginning, I would say. Like um, based on your use case, like you have to figure out like how many um, requests I'm gonna get per second, how many responses I would need to generate per second or per minute. And how slow is your system? Like the generation part takes like a couple of seconds. There is you're doing a web API call, web search, so that takes like a couple of seconds. So
Right.
what pieces can you make? Is this necessary to do that? Like
Mm.
there are what I'm getting at is there's no one solution for this. There are like
Right.
different
Right.
pieces, and you need to like
Yeah.
optimize each one of them and make them
Mhm.
scalable.
Okay.
If that
Okay.
makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
no, no, definitely. And clearly, this is not like a one, one sentence solution or whatever. There are layers to it. I think a couple of things that stood out from your explanation. One, you talked about the vector database. So do you have any recommendation? I know like all the like the tutorials and the open source tutorials that you see a lot of usage of the Chroma, which is like the open source vector database. Um, I do see a lot of I think blog posts and everything from MongoDB. I think they are pretty active in having these meetups and everything, and they talk about their vector database. We have VV8 and all that. So do you have like a idea on what works well, at least so far? Like, yeah.
Scalability wise, I've seen OpenSearch doing really well,
Okay.
bit expensive.
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
I've heard good things about Pinecone as well. I haven't used
Okay.
it personally.
And I think the second point that you mentioned was where you want to scale. It could be in the retrieval part, in the generation part, and everything. Um, I think the follow-up question would be, what is your process, or what's been this process so far? I know everyone is like, things are rapidly opening up, especially in the RAG space. It's continuously evolving. So far, has there been any step that's been useful for you in terms of how do you think about, do I think about, scaling this particular part of the system versus that? Is there a starting point that has been useful for you or just your
So,
process?
so I would say track everything.
Okay,
Monitoring everything is really important. From like the
okay,
input that's coming in,
right,
um, the query rewriting you're doing, the calls that you're making, how
right,
long did the vector DB take? Um,
right,
the generation piece, like monitor every single thing and the
right,
response time, the performance, what is happening to the input when it goes in, what do you get after it goes through a module. So
right,
tracking everything helps you figure out what needs to be worked on, what's the lower hanging fruit
right,
that could help you. Basically,
right.
I think that has been helpful, like tracking
Excellent.
everything.
Okay. Is there a tool that you'd recommend? Like, do you use like OneDB or anything that you recommend for tracking, or it's just a uh,
Prometheus and stuff, but Langsmith is pretty good
okay, okay,
for tracking stuff. Nothing really specific to L like
uh,
LLM tracking.
okay.
I haven't
Excellent.
relied on
Okay,
them. Yeah.
okay. Great. Yeah, but I mean, I'm following, as part of the research for product bulb and everything. I do follow a lot of like the LLM ops, MLOps, LLM ops kind of companies. Obviously, you have a lot of tools now. The next question is on data requirements and pre-processing. So what are generally the data preparation and pre-processing steps you consider or critical um, for for a RAG system? In this case, do you have any like unique like techniques to overcome any of the limitations? I think one other question would be how does it differ from like your traditional like data processing, traditional machine learning to Gen AI, I guess.
So it depends on the use case, but basically, you have to, there is the embedding piece, right? So you have to figure out how you're going to chunk your documents before you
Right,
do your embedding. And you
right,
would want to like overlap the chunks. That's very
right.
important. Um, then the other thing is important is um, multimodality. Like, do you have
Okay,
images in your documents? Do you want to like summarize those, like get a caption for that image and then do the embedding on that? Or do you
okay,
want to, so you can use a VLM there, like a vision language model and figure out the summary. Or you can, then you can go into like multimodal semantic
right,
space and you can like the other way is that like put image as well as language in the same semantic
right.
space and then you're pulling so you can go both ways there. Then the other thing that is important is understanding how language models are different,
Okay,
Jeremy Harvard recently released like how he wants every website to have this
mhm,
LLMs.txt file. Because
okay,
honestly, these models, they don't read document like we as humans read. So if you go
okay,
check out the documentation for Langsmith. They would like
okay,
take screenshots, explain how to do it, and then
right,
like go step by step. And then they would be like, oh, do you want to dive deeper? Then you go into another document, then you would like try to read through it. While LLMs, you can just give them like a whole loads of text and they would be
right,
able to read through it and answer
right,
about it. So
right,
it's important to keep that in mind when you're doing
mhm,
pre-processing. Um,
right,
and also keep in mind what your use case is. You're trying to pull answers out of chunks, so
right,
you need to be able to pull out the right chunks for that particular answer. So I would
right,
suggest like um, keeping that in mind when you're doing the pre-processing. Then the
right,
other thing is like once you have built your system, you can use synthetic data to test out your
right,
system. If you don't
mhm,
have users yet, you can take a paragraph and then you can ask this bigger model to like go through that paragraph, generate like a bunch of questions that could be answered out of that paragraph. And send this ask a question through your system and see if this paragraph is getting pulled you know to answer that question so you would
right.
know your system is performing well or not.
Right. So that in itself is the evaluation part. Like, how
Yeah.
do you evaluate your rack system? Excellent. So you talked about the chunk sizes. Do you think chunking size itself makes difference, or do you think it depends on the amount of text or the size of the input text you have? Like, would that make any difference?
So it depends on the kind of data you have. For example, if you have like a bunch of YouTube video transcripts, you would want to like, hopefully, if it's short enough and it's not like hitting like the context size, you can like use this whole video transcript as one chunk, and you can create an embedding for that,
Right.
with along with like the YouTube video name, who the author is. That could be the metadata piece as well. Um, the other thing is like if it's really long, you want to.
Mhm.
That's why I was talking about overlapping. You want to overlap those chunks because
Mm.
there might be, if you just cut it off, there might be some context missing.
Okay.
So because you're automating this chunking piece,
Okay. Right.
that's why it's
Right.
important that you overlap pieces there.
Right. Perfect. Okay, so chunk sizes overlapping the chunks. Excellent. Okay, so the next one is about the LLM technique selection itself. Like, how do you select what technique to use? Your thoughts on RAG versus fine tuning. When do you use one over the other? Yeah, and if there's a practical example of how you chose in your product, I guess.
So I wouldn't say RAG and fine tuning are comparable, but RAG is a technique for you to generate answers from chunks and you have like a huge database. It's a way of giving proprietary knowledge to these LLMs, which have been trained on all the data out there on the internet, and also a way to give latest knowledge. For example, these models might not know that Donald Trump is a president of United States because the elections happened recently. They don't
Right.
retrain the models regularly because it's very expensive.
Right.
So RAG is a technique to give context to these models when they answer questions. This could be you putting the data in a vector DB where it's pulling from. It could be anything else too. It could make an
Right.
API call and pull that information and give it in a context. So that is where I would suggest using RAG when you want to put your data in there. But there could be cases where these models, for example, you're in the legal space and you want the answer in the legal language, which these models don't do because they have been,
General
I
purpose.
would say, yeah, they are general purpose, and the data they have been given, it's meant for like it was a question answer database.
Right.
That's the instructor tune model, right? Like
Right.
so they are not really suitable for that, and that is where you would want to fine tune it. You want it to. You're not giving it facts. You're actually giving it I would say format. Like that
Right.
is how it's supposed to answer and
Right.
not what it's supposed to answer.
Right.
So that is where I would suggest using fine tuning. Yeah.
Okay. I do see a lot of posts and everything about, the tone in which you want the your system to react or system to generate stuff. So it's interesting when you talk about, whether if it's in the legal space, that the wording or the terminology or the tone would be different. I'm curious to see. I don't know if has been done yet, but any comparison on, for a same use case, they do RAG versus they do fine tuning, and if they have seen a difference. I'm sure there should be. Um, yeah, if there's a
Uh, I
paper or
cannot come up
something.
with any examples
Yeah, yeah.
from top of my head, but there must be
Yeah,
cases. But I, it's mostly if you want it to answer in a
right,
certain tone, you would want to go for fine tuning.
right,
You wouldn't want to use it if you want to put in facts. Like RAG
right,
makes more sense. You can give the
right.
facts in the
More grounded.
context.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I think now we'll go to practical, experience-based questions. What are some of the practical lessons you have learned from deploying Gen AI solutions? Is there any like common pitfalls that companies or your clients in general they've seen, or is there any weird stuff that you didn't think would be a problem and was actually a problem when you were any quirky stuff or
So it's I would have never assumed there would be a lot of bad actors, but there are bad actors out there. The moment they feel
oh
that there's an LLM behind it, they would
okay
bombard it with questions, and it would cost you. So it's very important to figure out in your use case what's like the average length of a conversation. If you're making a
ah,
conversational bot, it could go up to like
okay
70 messages, and then you would be like, why is it going up to 70? Who's like talking to a customer support bot for like 70 messages?
ah
So you would want to make sure that first of all, if the conversation length increases, it becomes harder for the LLM to answer properly, you know?
right
So it's important for you to either like summarize the earlier conversation and give it to the LLM as context, or
okay
you would want to maybe like just cut off like the earlier messages and just keep like the last 30 messages, you know? So
ah
it, depending on your use case. The other thing
okay
is like if it goes beyond like a certain length, you might want to shut down the bot there and be like, you might want to start the conversation again.
okay
And note down like who the user is. So it's very important to find anomalies. So this
right
could just be like the conversational length. It could be the
right
query length. It could be like it's very important to keep like I mentioned this earlier, like track every single thing because you would
okay
want to like tag the anomalies. And these could
right
be like bad actors on your platform misusing your tool.
right.
So that's
So
important.
adversarial inputs and testing against it. Um, that's awesome. I think not a lot of people have talked about it. People talk about, how great it is in like, like a customer Q&A system and everything. So follow-up question to that, have you seen any, like, have you used any tools to, either put a guardrail around that, or how do you mitigate that? Like one answer you mentioned is, just cutting short uh, the session, I guess. Um,
I haven't used any tools specific to this. I would
okay,
just suggest like it's more about like tracking every single thing and
okay,
having like maybe a dashboard of all the metrics you're tracking,
okay,
and maybe analyzing the queries as well. So I always do this, like analyze the kind of queries that helps you as a
right,
company as well. Maybe the new
right,
users ask certain kind of queries, experienced user asked certain kind of queries, and you might want to improve your onboarding process so
right,
that people don't have those kind of queries. You can improve your system completely based on the kind of queries people are asking. So it's important to track that. And that's where you would like, when you like cluster them, you will figure out these
right,
anomalies that people are asking. And the other thing is like, you can build a classifier. So you can build a classifier which would classify every query into these clusters. And when you see like something is growing into this other cluster, you might want to
right,
like improve your system first of all to cater to those if they're important, or
right.
you might want to figure out like if this is
How to cut
we
down.
might want to block the user. Yeah.
Very nice. No, that's a very good point. And I do know there are multiple LLM security companies, like literally working on the very specific use case that you mentioned. But yeah, I think it has just exploded on how and what guardrails to build and stuff like that. Very nice. Okay, that was a very good example. The next one is integration with legacy systems. Like, how do you approach, say you are, you're building like a Gen AI system for your client. They may have like existing pipelines, everything in place. So how do you approach integrating the system, like the Gen AI system, with legacy systems? And is there any like very specific steps that you do to ensure like smoother adoption? Have you seen like something that works really well versus not? Yeah.
The UX. It's very important.
Okay.
First of all, this technology is so new,
Okay.
and we are still figuring out the patterns. So it's very important what the UX looks like. And
Right.
people, like the Q&A bot that we were talking about earlier, like people know, oh, this is how a search bar looks. I can go ask a question, and it
Right.
pops down or pops up, and there's a thumbs up, thumbs down, and there's a human support button. So like people have seen all of that before, and they know like how to work with it. And then they see citation, so they can click on the citation. They can actually go to the YouTube video where it's getting pulled from. So it's very important to keep it consistent to what people are used to. That's very
Um.
important, especially when you're working with legacy systems.
Right. Right.
And this also helps you make it more familiar to them, so they would want to use it. Um, yeah, I think the UX piece is really important. So this could be with your chatbot as well, or how you're integrating. And a lot of companies have done a very good job at that, like
Right.
how you integrate that into an already existing system. And
Right.
sometimes for these bots, sometimes the suggestions that they give is just wrong. So you don't want people to like do an action to like get rid of it. It should just
Right.
be gone. For example, like GitHub Copilot, like when it does a
Mhm.
suggestion, it's gray, and if you keep typing, it would just go away.
Right.
You've just
Right.
ignored the suggestion, and you have given
Right.
them an implicit feedback by not accepting the suggestion. So
Right.
it's important to keep that in mind. Make it as
Right.
simple as possible for the users to use your feature.
Uh, right. No, you actually touched on a very important product or like product design kind of factor, which is the UX. Uh, at least in traditional machine learning and AI products, people did not like think a lot about how that particular system or the AI system is going to be used by like the end user. And I know a lot of products have not, reached the market just because they were, people didn't know how to use it. I think that's one place where ChatGPT kind of, opened up the space. No, awesome. That's a great point. Um, the next question is on feedback and iteration process. Like, how do you incorporate customer feedback? Like, say in this Q&A system that you had. Um, uh, so how do you incorporate the feedback into the development process? How does that work? How do you iterate based on real world usage, or how often do you iterate? Just some pointers on that.
It's actually, the answer is not very fancy. I actually look through the
Okay.
data. So if
Okay.
there's a thumbs up, thumbs down, there are very few of them. Not
Right.
every user gives you feedback, especially
Right.
when they have strong emotions, they will give you feedback. So
Right.
go through the feedback. I try to cluster them and figure out like which cluster has the lowest feedback, which has a higher feedback. What can we do? Maybe it needs more documentation to improve on that. So like figure out like what the answer was, what was retrieved, what needs to be improved on. And sometimes what I've noticed also is the feedback is negative, but according to the domain expert, the retrieved portion was correct, the answer was correct, and still the
Oh,
feedback was negative. So maybe the user was trying to ask something else, which we also, as a domain expert, don't understand. Or
okay.
maybe it's just like too much fiction for someone to like type it out and they just want to talk to a human being. So maybe like audio input. I've thought about it. Like audio input
Okay.
might be useful there
Okay.
to just
Okay.
to reduce the amount of friction that people have to go through to ask a question.
Right.
But yeah, it's just a lot of manual process. Go through your data. Very important to go through your data, but
Right.
it's very
Right.
important. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So is there like a timeline that you kind of follow? I see after like say X amount of queries or 1 month of time or something like that. Is there like a
I do it every
baseline?
week.
Okay,
I do it every
every week.
week. Yeah. So end of every
Uh,
week, just like go
okay.
through your data.
Okay. No, perfect. That is exactly the kind of information I think this audience would want because we keep talking about, you gotta evaluate your systems, you gotta have your guardrails in place, all these things, but understanding how it works in the real world, um, uh, I think gives us an idea of, okay, this is how, this is the baseline. There is a baseline of someone doing this. So that's great. I think. So thank you for that. I think the next question is on performance monitoring. What are the key metrics and performance indicators you track after this, say a generative AI solution is in place? How do you measure the model effectiveness over time? I think this is a layer of question here. One is the model metrics itself, like whatever model you've used for your, say, the RAG implementation. The other one is the product metrics, like, do you track, say, number of users using, does it go up or go down? Yeah, so in general, metrics, like, you know.
So there is like the user specific one. So like
Mhm.
um, the user ID, the organization ID, um, the group that they belong to. Maybe they're an engineer, they are an architect. So all of that is really important. Then, like specific to the model or the system, I would say
Mhm.
important to track like the response time, performance,
Mm.
or like how much memory you're using. All of that is the
Right.
performance piece. Then the metric part is like I would suggest like tracking based on a use case. Like you can track like what the length of the query is, what the length of the response is. Is it
Right.
like getting longer, getting shorter? Um, doing doing the analysis that I mentioned earlier, like the kind of queries that are getting asked, and then like tracking tracking the response of everything.
Mhm.
So like after each module, what you get as a response and
Right.
how long that takes is I would say very important. Like metric wise, you can have like human feedback, which is like a slow metric, I would say. It
Right.
takes a
Yeah.
while for you to like get that feedback. But
Yeah.
you can have like a faster metric. For example, if your use case is summarization, you can
Mhm.
figure out like based on this query, this huge essay that came in, was the summary shorter?
Right.
Or was it like too short? Like how, like what should the ratio between like the input and the output should be? So there could be a
Right.
bunch of metrics you can come up with based on your use case, which is like faster to track.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and then and then I would say like please go through your data.
Okay.
um,
Yes.
you track everything and go through your data to figure out like if what you're tracking even makes sense and aligns with the business value.
Okay. Right. No, I think all great advices, really know in drag evaluation, do we use golden data sets? Like, is there like a ground truth data set or something that, we need to generate or we need to keep? We always talk about holdout data sets in machine learning, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
you never show that in the training and everything, and then that is the golden data set you evaluate your model on. But for practical use cases like this, do you have like, these are my 100 set of questions for the Q&A system, and the model has to, even though not exactly, but at least has to get the context in like saying 98 out of the 100 questions. Like, is there
That's a very good question, and we do use it. It's very
okay,
important to have a golden data set because
right.
we want to make sure what goes out is there's no
Mhm.
regression happening. Whatever is going out, whenever you iterate on your system, it's still performing on the questions that are important, the golden data set. Um,
Right,
but again, the golden data set, it's not constant. You need to
right,
keep working on that. So these are like, for example, I looked at my data today and I figured out these are like the bunch of like questions which were the edge cases. I tried to fix my system around it, and now I'm gonna add those questions into my golden data set. So the
right,
next time when I'm iterating, I'm at least like performing on these bunch of
right,
questions. So I
right,
would say your golden data set is also like iterative, like you need
right.
to keep
Okay.
working on that as well.
That is a very good point. Also, I think people might ask, you have all these benchmark data sets, which all the models themselves use, you for ranking and everything. But for most of the practical use cases, those benchmark data sets don't make sense. Like I have a very specific use case. Uh, the model could do very well in the benchmark, and it could not do great in our use case. So, all great points. Keep iterating your golden data sets. That's a great point. Excellent. So the penultimate question about cost resource management. I think this is very important, interesting, and because you consult for a lot of companies, I'm interested to see your take on this. Gen AI can be resource intensive. The cost factor keeps changing. Things are getting cheaper and cheaper. So how do you optimize for cost and resources in production? What strategies do you use for balancing the quality versus budget constraints? I think the other sub question here is the cost of the models themselves keep changing. Like, suddenly one particular model is, much cheaper today than yesterday because, a newer model has come out. So how do you like, one option is just modularizing all the stuff so that you can plug and play with a lot of stuff. So your thoughts on how do you go about this? Yeah.
So I would suggest it's instead of like focusing on making it cheaper, it's very important, especially when your whole product is about it, is to like find the product market fit. If you don't find that, there's no point like making it cheaper. Might as well like pivot
Right,
and work on something else. So I think
right,
that's the most important thing. But otherwise, build your system and then like make it fast and then try to like focus on making it cheaper. It's important that you
right,
have users and they want to use it, and then you would want to like
right,
focus on making it cheaper.
right,
You could go for like smaller models. You don't necessarily need like the biggest model out there
right,
for your use case. In the beginning, it seems like that, but you can get away with like a lot of prompt engineering techniques
right,
and use a smaller model for your use case. And then there are like a lot of open source models out there, like
right.
Llama. The Meta just released Llama 3. I think 3. Um,
3.3, yeah, 1 hour
3.70
back, I don't know.
billion, and it's
Yeah,
performing at par to GPT-4o. That's what I've heard. I haven't tried it yet.
yeah,
So there are a lot of ways
right,
that you can reduce the cost. Um,
right,
but I think it's so important first to like find the product market fit.
right,
Uh,
right.
uh, yeah, that would be my suggestion.
No, perfect. I think that's a great advice. I just read just today. I think I read a post from Ethan Malik, the famous professor, um, and he mentioned that the latest O1 reasoning model from OpenAI, I think, does really really well, very complex problem solving, like PhD level problem solving. But also he said that not everyone has PhD level problems. Like, most users don't have PhD level problems. So yeah, your point exactly bang on, was just identify which model you want to use for your use case and everything. And I think multiple times you keep, which is a very interesting tactic, first build something, then build faster, and then go for build cheaper. So, excellent advice. Apurva, this was amazing. Thank you so much. This was so many golden nuggets and tidbits on practical RAG implementation. But before letting you go, I ask all my guests this question. What is your favorite product? It could be anything, whatever comes to your mind.
Favorite
What is your favorite product?
product? Um, does it have to be LLM related?
No, it doesn't have to be LLM. It could be anything.
Shazam.
Oh, okay.
It's
Interesting.
amazing. I
Okay.
love the interface as well. It's like one click and then you're like recording whatever is happening and then
Okay.
it tells you the song. It's
Okay.
amazing. I love it. It's like the best product.
Shazam.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have about, it seems like you have a big use case for that. Like, yeah, I've never, I would think someone who is in music would probably say Spotify or something. So that's very interesting. Okay.
I don't end up listening to music so much. I listen to a lot of
Okay.
podcasts. But like,
Okay.
so every time we are in the car and like I listen to a song, I'm like, oh, this was my favorite song like five
Ah.
years ago. What's the name? And then you Shazam it. Yeah.
Interesting. Very nice. That was very interesting. Apurva, thank you so much. I had lots of fun speaking with you. I am sure the audience would see lots of value on, the lessons that you have shared from your like practical Gen AI system creation. Where can audience find you? I know you have your own website, apurvamisra.com. Is there any space that you prefer our audience connect with you or yeah?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So
Okay.
just like look up my name, Apurva Misra, and you would find me there. And yes, my website, and you can find my email address there as well. So
Right. I will link to all the your social media links in our show notes. But Apurva, thank you so much. Yeah.
thank you.
All right.